Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's hard to tell who's on, but hopefully as many people as have been invited are on. My name is Dominic Thomas. I'm the chairman of the Woodbridge Housing Opportunities Committee. It's my intention to give you a brief introduction, then I have to run to my other computer and attend a planning and zoning meeting in another town. But I would like to thank you for participating tonight. This is a very important step towards the for the Housing Opportunity Committee as it proceeds with its charge. I do want to publicly, in front of the other boards and commissions, thank my committee, which is an extremely hardworking committee and takes the charge very seriously, which is to help formulate a long-term affordable housing plan in accordance with the state statute, but also to promote a mix of housing opportunities in Woodbridge, which is needed and which is in the POCD of Woodbridge. The committee has done much work over the last several months, and there is much to do. I do want to single out, by the way, the outreach and survey committee and the work that they did. In case you don't know, in the SCROG survey that closes, I believe, this Saturday or Sunday, um, Woodbridge, at the last time I checked, is number one in percentage responses. And that is because of the hard work reaching out. And that will be a big step forward, even though it's a regional thing, that will be a big step forward uh, in our going forward with the plan. We intend on doing our own survey. We're working on that. And we are intend on having a public forum. What is important is that we need the input of the public to help formulate the plan, and we need the input of the public officials, and that's why we're having this meeting. It is important that we have an honest and frank dialogue back and forth, so that we can understand how we can proceed to a successful housing plan. And with that, since I have to go to my other meeting, I'm going to turn this over to Kathy Hunter, who will chair the meeting from our my committee's point of view and introduce David Fink, who will be the facilitator of tonight's. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dominic, and good luck with your meeting tonight.
Thank
And
you.
I'm very happy to introduce David Fink. He is a housing policy consultant. He's currently working with the South Central Regional Council of Government to help advance this affordable housing planning process. He's also an adjunct lecturer at UConn and Central Connecticut State University, where he teaches American government and journalism. He's had a career in journalism. And I had the wonderful opportunity of working with him when he was the policy director at the Partnership for Strong Communities. So he is really great at providing assistance in community engagement tactics. And I think it would be really wonderful for for promoting our planning efforts. So with that, David, please take it away.
Well, thanks, Kathy. And thank you, Dominic and Beth. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to talk to all of you tonight. Woodbridge has done yeoman's work in past months. I think what Dominic referred to in terms of the response rate on the housing survey shows that you're looking to do things the right way and get your residents involved. As you know, SCROG is helping to facilitate the creation of housing plans for all the towns in the region. But they have engaged RKG Associates from Boston that is helping the towns do that. They will meet with your officials, they will meet with residents. The point is that they will not write the plan for Woodbridge. All of you, your town residents and officials, will write the plan. And therefore, what I'm doing tonight, and I'm happy I was invited, is to see if I can help all of you figure out good ways of approaching the writing of that plan. Uh, Issues you can consider, ways of talking about it with your residents. You see the title of this is "The Magic's in the Message." It's how you talk about housing and who you talk about it with. That will really help the town understand its housing needs, what it has now, what it needs. Equally important, where it needs it and where it doesn't need it. So I'm happy to be here tonight. I think the way we'll do this is that uh, I've asked Chris Sullivan, who I've been happy to work with for a while here, to advance these slides. We're not exactly technological marvels here, so we've worked it out. So Chris will uh, advance the slides one by one. We will ask you at the to hold your questions until the end, so that we can get through this and perhaps answer a lot of your questions along the way. Let me just first tell you, though, before, because Kathy and Dominic asked me to point out what the schedule ought to be. So uh, by the end of this week, the survey, until the end of this week, the survey will be open, and your town has done a great job of making sure it is available for you to provide your responses either on paper or online or by social media. And that will be through the end of this month, the end of this week, and frankly, the end of this month. After that, there will be meetings with your town officials like this. And I'm happy to come back and meet with anybody who wants and facilitate discussions with anybody who wants in town. Uh, After that, there will be municipal group meetings. The RKG people will meet with your town and a couple of surrounding towns and talk about issues uh, that are peculiar to your towns, but also connect you with surrounding towns because housing markets, as you know, are not, they don't stop at town lines. And it's good for you to kind of understand what the surrounding towns' issues are and how you connect with them. After that, there will be a series of other meetings. They will come with data that they have collected about Woodbridge. They will ask for your response to that data. They will give you some ideas. They will talk about the survey results in your town. And then they will go back and they will draft a plan. And then they will come back and meet with you and ask you what you think about that draft. And you will have an ability to respond to that and talk to them about the housing you believe is needed and where it's needed and where you don't think it ought to be. And ultimately, they will come back to you with a final plan that you will get to look over. And then the town will get a chance to either adopt or not adopt that plan and maybe seek revisions. So this is the town's plan, and the town needs to have input into it. And as I said, you are all off to a really, really good start. You have terrific public officials, municipal officials. I've gotten to meet them. I think the people on the housing committee are very, very committed, and I've gotten to talk to them a couple of times. I've known Kathy forever, and you're lucky to have her and Dominic. And so it's really your plan, and you have to make sure that you make your voices heard so you get the housing plan that you need. And so, Chris, with that, I think we'll go to the first slide. Uh, I, I think the point is that when I say town residents come together and build together, I don't mean literally with the bricks and the mortar build the housing. And I don't think towns should get into the business of building housing. But what I mean to build together is build out, help shape the vision that you have for your town. And residents I've seen in other towns have gotten together and talked about this. There are really good examples, towns like um, Fairfield and Stonington and Old Saybrook and Guilford have brought residents together and discuss what they want and where they want it. So it's really, really important if you can do that. I always tell towns I will never tell you what to do. It's not my place. Number one. Number two, I don't know enough about your town. And so you need to decide. But I will tell you what other towns have done, and we'll spend a little time on that tonight because sometimes, although towns are not exactly alike, and you can't do exactly what another town did because every town is different. There's different topography and geography and demography. There's different housing stock and different housing needs, different politics, different history. so no town is exactly alike, and it's probably impossible to copy one single town. But towns have made good decisions. Towns have made good choices, and your approach, I would think would be to kind of view this as a buffet table of ideas. Take what you want, leave the rest, and so we'll try to go through some of that tonight. Um, Housing, as we know, is vital, but it's controversial. And I understand that. And I've always tried to understand that. When I make presentations to towns, I always get the idea that uh, people's homes are their castles and everything is tied up in their home. The check that people write for their home is probably the largest check most of them ever write. Their family's security, their children's education, their retirement is tied up in that home. And so um, I understand why people, uh, are very, very concerned about their neighborhoods, the quality of life in their town. That will be upset by adding the wrong type of housing. Unfortunately, there are some misconceptions that shape people's thinkings. We'll talk about some of them tonight. But I don't ever criticize people for being concerned about their towns and that usually the towns they love. That's why they live there. And so we're going to be really patient with people. And I think it's really important for all of us to be patient with our fellow town residents on the housing issue. Housing is vital, but it's controversial. And I think it goes without saying. The right housing option for a family can bring happiness. It can bring opportunity. The wrong one can really cause everything in that household to fail if they get over their heads, if they don't have appropriate housing, if they can't afford it's really a problem. So, Chris, we can go on to the next slide now. Thanks. Um, Again, your town, and I happen to have known people who live in Woodbridge over the years. I live in West Hartford, but I know your town is full of successful people. They have resources. They're educated and they're open minded and thoughtful. But like every town, there's going to be always going to be some people who are closed minded. Some people who are guided by stereotypes. They think affordable housing. When they think about that, they view, I don't know, what can we call it? The projects, Pruitt-Igoe, Father Panic Village. They imagine graffiti on the walls and bullets flying through the air and you know, drug deals going on. And, it's really not the case. And we'll show you some good examples in a minute. But the point is, as I say, you can't blame them. Everything is tied up in their homes, and I like to be patient with people, and that's why I'll stay online tonight and answer all of your questions till there are no more questions left because people have a lot of questions about this, and the reason is they love the town that they live in. For those, I put this down on the PowerPoint. I took behavioral psych, and I know a lot of you did, and you learn in that people are afraid of loss. They're afraid to lose uh, the neighborhood, the community, the town that they love, and we need to understand that. That's very, very important. So, I preface what we're going to talk about tonight with all of that. Chris, I'm ready for the next one. Um, so the right approach. Again, there's no wrong approach or right approach, but what I mean by the right approach is ways you can be successful. It is important to be inclusive, communicate, evaluate, educate, build together. The really good thing about the town having a housing committee is that, and we recommended that, and I think you probably know the Regional Plan Association did a guidebook. They were commissioned by the Department of Housing to do that, and they recommended the towns create housing committees because what you really want in town is a conversation. And the people I know that you have on your committee are people who have connections in town. They know the town. They get around the town. Because a lot of the good conversations don't happen in a forum at the town library. They happen in aisle 8 of the Stop and Shop on Saturday or on the sidelines of the soccer game. People want to know, well, what are they trying to do here? And those are the conversations and the people you have on your housing committee. And I hope, a lot of the people on the boards and commissions that are involved in this conversation tonight are people who know the town and they know people in the town. And that's what has to happen. So again, the job is to figure out, what the town has, what it needs, where to put it, It's very important to offer choices. I've seen towns that offer their residents one choice, and that doesn't work out very well. For those of us who have children, we know that you get a lot farther by saying, "Honey, you can have the broccoli or the peas," and give them a choice because it empowers your kids. Or you can have it with ketchup or not. But it's really good to give people choices. And we'll talk about the myths and the reality. There's good research that talks about. Some of the misconceptions that people believe about school costs and property values and crime, and we'll get back that people, the thing about housing is that people don't have a lot of perspective about what housing costs, because most people are satisfied with their housing situation. Every poll that I've ever seen, both in Connecticut and nationally, shows that about 85 to 90% of people are satisfied with their housing situation, and that's because they don't have to think about it very much. They can afford the housing that they need, and we'll get to that. Chris, next one. Um, uh, Housing is also, as I say, we used to call it at the partnership the foundation of opportunity. It has an impact on a lot of different issues. I have always thought that if we solve the housing problems in the state, we will solve other problems. Children who can live in school districts that have resources do better in math and reading, and the research shows that. We'll talk about that. Um, if you can put housing near transit and get people out of their cars, they stop fouling the air. And if they live in denser housing where they can share the heat from the apartment next door, they use less in terms of energy. Like I say, transportation, you can get people on trains and on buses and out of their cars. If you put it in the right place, they'll have access to jobs and training and healthcare and childcare. So it's really important. The one thing I would say, though, as we begin this, is that you're not going to convince everyone. Uh, I think a search for unanimity in your town is probably going to come up short. Uh, we worked when I was at the partnership in Guilford. The Guilford Foundation asked us to come down. We created two videos for them in the town. One of them, silent, ran in the library of the town, the lobby of the town library. Everyone walked in there. They said, and they went home. They saw people holding up, if you will, a whiteboard that said, "Guilford needs more housing choices because," and they filled it in. And so David would go home and say, "Hey, Mabel, you'll never guess, I saw Kathy on this video at the town library, and she was saying," and it began a conversation in their household. We created another video for them that ran. It was with sound, and it was played by the Rotary Club and the League of Women Voters and the Zoning Commission, and it got a conversation going in town. And we had two enormously attended forums in their town library. And in the end, we did a survey for them in Guilford, just in Guilford. They got 400 responses, and like I say here, 50 of the responses were a little harsh. Uh, but the point is that 350 of the responses were positive, and so the first selectman understood that he had support and people were getting it. The problem is that a lot of people, or not a lot, but there are going to be some people who are going to be afraid and about giving handouts to people. They're going to think of it that way, or they're going to say, "I did it myself, and why can't they do it themselves?" And there are a lot of reasons for that, and we don't have to get into it tonight. I only mean to say that there is a way to develop support. Guilford, some of you may know, 2 years ago, they did such a good job in their conversation in town, had a referendum on conveying a piece of municipally owned property to a developer for affordable units near their train station, and the referendum passed something like 200 to 30. So it is possible to increase communication, increase education, increase understanding, but you're not going to get everyone, and so I just caution you on that. Next slide, please. I call housing, and I've always called housing, a tap water issue. Uh, and the reason I call it that is because when I go to get up in the morning to wash my face and brush my teeth, I turn on the water and it appears and it's magic. and I have no idea how it got there. And same thing with housing for most people. Most people can find the housing option that they need. They can afford it, and they take it for granted. And housing has just gotten there. And I like to say, everyone cares about housing. They just don't know they care about it. They don't think about it because, like I say, it's available to them and they have it. Towns have not spent a lot of time in Connecticut, except for the large cities, proactively creating the housing that they need just because of the way they've grown. And we'll get into that in a minute. So just understand that N- very, very, very smart, well educated, well meaning, thoughtful, great people have given not a lot of thought to housing because it's just something that for them occurs naturally and they don't stop and have never stopped to think about what it really costs because they can afford it. And more to the point, that some people have a hard time affording it because not because they do jobs that are unimportant, they do important jobs and just don't pay that much. So I'm ready for the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so towns seek to create more multifamily homes with income restricted units for a few reasons. Right now, the market really, really wants additional multifamily housing. This started to happen in 2010 when the bulk of millennials started to grow into jobs. Some of them started to get married, think about child rearing, and they wanted multifamily units because Connecticut, if you don't know it, is number one in education debt. And a lot of those millennials, even if they could get a mortgage, um, were not that interested in taking on additional debt. So they were demanding a lot of multifamily housing. At the same time, their parents, the baby boomers, were reaching a retirement age, and they had the kids were gone, and they were not that interested in raking the leaves and shoveling the snow anymore. So they started looking for it. So about 10 years ago, we started to see a huge new demand for multifamily housing. As all of you know, because you all took Economics 101, when you have a lot of demand and not much supply, the value goes up and the prices go up. And the good part of that, it's not so good if you can't afford it, but the good part for towns is that if they built multifamily housing, they were adding to their grand list because that's what the market demanded. And therefore, property tax revenues were going up on those properties that towns started building, and a number of them have. Um, Another good reason to build that kind of housing that's going to attract young people to town is towns like Woodbridge, where I think the median uh, uh, age is 49. It tends to be an older town. And older towns, they want to attract buyers for their homes. And my wife and I live in West Hartford. I remember when we moved here, we came here to rent because my wife was in law school and I was working for the Hartford Current. And but like other people who rent in town, you find a place of worship and a doctor and a dentist and friends and a school and a neighborhood, and you decide we like it here and we want to buy here. And that's how you attract future buyers who bid up the prices of the homes in your town. Towns, by the way, I'm not sure about Woodbridge, but towns that have had a lot of um, single family homes over the last 10 years, it's turned around a bit, but their grand lists were plateauing and they were not seeing growth in the value of their single family homes because uh, they weren't able to attract buyers and there weren't as many bids for homes. But so it's a good way to attract buyers. Another reason is for merchants in town. If you have a commercial base and merchants who are paying property tax, and you want that, so that property tax burden is not just on residential property owners. It's good to have people who shop those merchants and renters buy a lot of stuff because some of the older homeowners, they bought all their drapes and TVs and carpets and all the things they need, but people who move into town need to buy stuff and they patronize the coffee shops and the dry cleaners, etc. So it's good for the merchants and keeps you from having empty storefronts. Again, also working in town, there are workers who you need in important jobs, not just in town hall, although municipal workers are important to have and it's good to have them live in town. And then, as we say, Uh, if you have people living in town who are living on the edge, and every town, and I would encourage you to look at the United Way of Connecticut's Alice study. I'm sure Woodbridge has a fair number of Alice households, and those are people who are making below the survival budget, as the United Way puts it, which is $90,000 for a household of four, or $28,000 for an individual. Those people live on the edge and they lose some hours of work, or they have an unexpected expense like a broken carburetor or a water heater, and suddenly those people are behind on their rent. They're not. They could become homeless, or maybe they're just checking out the food pantry in town, and there are other social issues that come from people who are stressed about their housing costs. So it's a good thing to think about, and we can talk more about that later if you like. Chris, next slide, please. Um, Again, the residents' interests. It's good to allow elderly to age in place. A lot of people do not want to go to a nursing home, but if you're going to be able to stay in your house, you need to have a nurse's aide who can get to your home. It's good if they can live in town. And if you don't have a great public transportation system, like we say, it's good to have people who can live in the town and be able to get to the homes and take care of elderly people who want to age in place. Uh, a lot of towns are interested in, parents in those towns interested in seeing their children not just on Christmas and Easter, but they'd like to see them on Sunday afternoon for dinner, or for the football game. But kids, in order to come back home after college or graduate school, need an affordable place to live. Um, Again, do you want to provide opportunity for those who want to live in town? There are a lot of towns that where their teachers and their police officers and firefighters and municipal workers can't live in town. I know that some of you may remember John McKinney, who's a great guy, who was the Senate Republican leader in the state legislature a few years ago. About 5 years ago, we had a snowstorm in the northern two-thirds of the state. The southern third of the state along the shore only got rain, but Fairfield, where John was from, had to cancel school that day because their teachers lived 4 or 5 towns away and couldn't get there. So, do you want to have your people, your workers, your key people living in town? And of course, we have a lot of baby boomers now, and the demographers and the doctors all tell us we're going to live till we're 90 years old. Well, if they're going to downsize, uh, they need a place to downsize this, and most of them want to stay in the town they've got friends in, and they've got their church or synagogue or mosque in, and they where they have connections. So that's another reason to do it. Chris, we can do the next slide. Thanks. So, like I say, it's in everybody's interest to do this. And if the housing's too expensive, there are going to be problems for residents. People will be burdened by their housing costs. HUD puts being burdened by the housing costs at 30% of your income. All of us remember when our folks told us when we were renting our first apartment not to spend more than 25% of our monthly income on rent. HUD put it at 30%. There are a lot of people in your town, I think about 29% of homeowners and 66% of your renters, who are burdened by their housing costs. And what that means is if they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing, they don't have as much money left over for food, shelter, clothing, insurance, healthcare, childcare. Now, it's not to say if you spend more than 30% of your income, you are necessarily burdened, because a millionaire who's spending $300,000 for his mortgage payment still has $700,000 left over for the rest. So I don't think we have to worry too much about him or her. But if you're making $50,000 and you're spending $15,000 of it on housing, you don't have a lot left over. So important to understand that. It's good for the merchants if people have more disposable income. And like we say, there's fallout on the municipality if people are hurting housing wise. Chris? Just a little bit about Connecticut's current housing situation so you understand the context. Connecticut is a very expensive state for housing. We've long had the fifth, sixth, or seventh median monthly housing prices in the nation. The Gini coefficient is a measure of income inequality. Generally, the way statisticians explain it, uh, if one person had all the wealth in a town and everyone else had nothing, the Gini coefficient would be 1.0. If income and wealth was equally distributed among everyone, it would be 0.0. Connecticut has a 0.50, and it's second in the nation. So we are second in wealth disparity. The reason why that can be a problem is that if you have great disparity, people with money tend to drive up the cost of all goods and services, including housing, and that therefore puts some of those goods and services and housing out of the reach of people at the other end of the spectrum. Like I said, statewide, 48% of renters and 32% of homeowners are burdened by housing costs. Um, in Woodbridge, it's higher for renters, a much larger percentage, over 60%, a little lower for homeowners, about 28, 29%. The other thing is that the last bullet, the National Income Housing Coalition puts out every year something called the housing wage. It's what you need to earn per hour to afford a typical two-bedroom unit in that state. And in Connecticut, you need to earn $27.37, um, or about $57,000 a year to earn to afford to rent a typical two-bedroom apartment. I went through when I was at the partnership, the Department of Labor website, where they list, believe it or not, 680 different occupations in Connecticut, and half of them don't pay the housing wage. So, we're talking about housing being quite expensive in Connecticut. Chris, thank you. Um, a little history here. We don't have the housing options we need in a lot of towns, and it's really no one's fault except that it's the way that towns grew. Um, Two-thirds of Connecticut towns built 40% of their uh, housing or more after 1970. Makes sense because in the 70s, all of us baby boomers were buying homes and starting families. And so that's how towns grew. A developer would buy a 40-acre cornfield and say to the town, I'd like to put 40 colonials on this property on 1-acre lots. And the town said, fine. And all the homes sold in about 2 or 3 weeks, and everybody was happy. But that's how most towns grew. Not the cities so much because they're hundreds of years old, but a lot of the towns grew that way. And as a result, um, about three-quarters of the towns in the state have 70% or more single family homes. And that was also fine for a while, except as I said earlier, that's not what the market is demanding right now. And so towns that have a skewed number of single family homes are finding that sometimes their grand lists have plateaued or not grown as fast, or in some cases actually even declined because there's just not as much demand for single family homes. The pandemic has changed that a bit because we've seen a spike in demand for single family homes. I think what that has actually been has just an acceleration of millennials who couldn't go to work in New York City anyway, deciding, okay, let's get married or let's buy that home now. So I can't really say what will happen going forward, but I can tell you that I think that again, because boomers are going to live longer and millennials have a lot of debt and have changed their lifestyle and are delaying marriage and some not marrying at all, there will be a great deal of demand going forward. It's not just a temporary thing for multifamily housing. Um, so the idea is that in a lot of towns, there are not enough rungs, bottom rungs on the ladder for people to come to a great town like Woodbridge and get on the ladder at the bottom rung with an affordable rental and then be able to move up and trade up and ultimately buy the home of their dreams in a great town. Some towns have transit. Woodbridge does not have commuter rail. You have bus lines. That's a good thing to put housing near bus lines. We can talk about that more. And this is not an exhaustive list, but a lot of towns are responding to these housing needs. I can tell you stories about all these towns and how they have worked with what they have to really expand their array of housing options in their towns. Chris, uh, again, 32% of the average American household budget is spent on housing. It's the largest part, 19% for transportation and 6 to 12% for energy. Interestingly enough, if people live within a half a mile of commuter rail, that 19% goes down to 9%. And that additional 10 percentage points of disposable income is valuable because it can pay for more housing, it can pay for childcare, healthcare, other things. So towns that have the ability to put housing near commuter rail are taking advantage of it. In Connecticut, 30 of the 169 municipalities have housing stock where more than 10% is income restricted for people of 80, 60, 50, 30% of median income. Those tend to be the cities and some of the first ring suburbs, not exclusively, but that's what most of those 30 municipalities have. The other 139 are below 10%. Uh, Another interesting thing that I referred to briefly before, United Way of Connecticut, I think now has done 4 or 5 iterations of its ALICE study. ALICE is an acronym that stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. Essentially, people who are working but are not making enough to really make it. As I said, the survival budget for an individual is $28,000 a year. For a family of four, $90,000 a year. Some of us are old enough to remember where $90,000 for a family of four was a lot of money. Not so much anymore. And in 140 of towns in the state, at least 20% of the households are Alice households, and Woodbridge is part of that group. These are people who we don't see. They tend to be hidden. They are making ends meet until the carburetor goes or the water heater goes, or mom or dad loses some hours working at the Walmart, and then suddenly they're down at the food pantry, or maybe there are stresses on the family and things go awry there, or some of them become homeless. There are a lot of people in Connecticut who are Alice households, about 37% statewide, and like I said, you can check the numbers. The Alice study is online. But for Woodbridge, I think the numbers are probably over 20%. As a matter of fact, I bet my life on it. Chris? So where do Scrog towns stand on a few different measures? Like we said, Alice, the last I saw, Woodbridge had 21%. The percentage of income restricted housing is about 1.2%. And like we said, actually, I thought that the renter burdened households were in the 60s. It looks here 84, although I saw a later number that said 60s. So don't take this 84 to the bank. Next slide, please. Again, this is the split statewide. About 2/3 of the households in the state own their homes, about a third rent. In Woodbridge, it's much higher than that. Your ownership rate is closer to 90%. So just so you know where you stand there. Next slide. Again, these are just a reiteration of some of those valuable statistics. I think we went through most of those, but they're here for you, and you have this PowerPoint, so you can use this in other presentations, or and as I say, if you need elaboration, you can call me on some of that. So again, next slide, please. A little more demographic data. You can see the racial breakdowns for the different towns in the region, and the single family and multifamily breakdowns as well. So you have all that information. Chris? Okay, so how do you bring prices down and make homes more affordable? Uh, there are a lot of ways to do it. You can do it with subsidy. You can do it with density. Mark Twain said, all of us should invest in land because God's not making any more. That's true if you build out, but he forgot one thing. If you build up, you can find more places for housing. And the good thing for a developer is that if towns allow a developer to build up 2, 3, 4 stories, he or she can spread land costs over more units, and that can lower the price of the housing. Uh, so a lot of it depends on the density you allow and the location. Generally, when you create housing, materials and labor cost the same whether you're building housing for low-income people or high-income people. The variable generally is land. Uh, and you can cut the land costs, like I say, by allowing more units on it. There are the usual suspects of town-owned property, the piece of property usually not so great that the state gives you for nothing, uh, vacant property or property that's for sale. Um, Interestingly enough, uh, there are some towns, I can't mention any names now, that are doing what cities have done all the time through their redevelopment agencies, which is they are approaching landowners because the people in the towns are driving around the towns and looking at the towns a different way. And that is to say that they don't necessarily look at properties based on what's there now. They look at what could be there. And there are properties along commercial strips, transit lines near the town center, sometimes industrial properties, uh, where the towns are doing what redevelopment authorities have always done, which is to approach the landowner and say, Kathy, is your property for sale? And Kathy might say, no. Well, say, but if we rezone this, we've decided this is a good property that would be good for some multifamily housing. If we rezoned it for multifamily housing, you could get 2 or 3 times what the value of the property is right now. Are you interested? And Kathy might still say no, but she might say yes. And you might ask 10 Kathys, and 7 might say no, but 3 might say yes. Now, the properties that I know some of these towns are looking at now are, if you can imagine, strip malls that were built in the 50s or 60s. That, 8 stores on a commercial thoroughfare. That time has, there's no better way to put it. Time has passed by, and 4 of the stores are vacant. And so that, the one town said to the property owner, when the leases are up on the other 4 stores, how about if we talk about rezoning this property? And he's thinking about it because it is a property that could be put to better use. Towns say to me, well, our town is built out. Well, there's no such thing. I don't believe, because you'd never see a crane in Manhattan. Towns, cities repurpose properties. And it's good to start thinking that way if it's possible. I mean, Woodbridge may not have those properties, it may not have those landowners, but I guarantee you that some of you on this call will start walking and driving around the town tomorrow and looking at certain properties and thinking, it might be better to put housing there than have what we have there. I know that in Simsbury, way back, this is 10 years ago, the town consultant identified 15 properties in the town center that could be used. And uh, beyond the 15, a couple of owners came forward and said, I wish you would consider our property for housing. One of which was the owner of a nursery that just happened to be off of Iron Horse Boulevard in the middle of Simsbury. And he said, I can move my mulch and my topsoil to some other place that my customers will know where to find me. This is a good property for housing. So, like I say, some towns are looking at their property a different way, and they're not thinking just because there's something there now doesn't mean there can't be something else there later. Um, like I say earlier, um, density is tolerable and advantageous in some places. Some people will be okay with it because in some locations, because you're not going to mess up transportation patterns. You're not going to mess up neighborhoods. And conversely, affordability is not as valuable in some places. I mean, there are rural towns and rural areas of some towns where, if you built an affordable unit for somebody and they had to buy a $500 clunker that got 8 miles to the gallon and was going to break down every 2 weeks, have you really done that household a favor? Probably not. So it's really good to put housing where people will tolerate it, and you'll reduce the chance of acrimony. And if you put it in a good place, it's also going to provide the residents with access to the services that they need. Uh, the attendant benefits are also that you can reduce sprawl and cut auto emissions, like I say, and enhance mass transit. Chris, next slide, please. Um, Again, this is all about, though, listening to the town's residents and seeing if they can help shape the plan. And what you're doing tonight is great. This kind of education and communication, sharing what you're learning is important. The town has a housing committee. You're doing that right too. Towns, like I say, have forums, and like I say, I'm happy to help there. You guys, I'm sure, could do it too. Uh, Invite everybody and let everybody talk and ask questions and get their feelings out and their questions answered. And like I say, you can do slideshows, you can do videos, the survey. You may want to do another survey come January or February in your town to follow up on some of the questions and see whether additional communication and education has changed any attitudes or refined some thinking in certain areas. So again, it's important, and putting it all on the town website is just a terrific idea. Next slide, please. Um, okay. Myths and misconceptions. I'll go into this a little more, but I can tell you that UMass was the first study I saw. This was, probably 12 years ago. Income restricted housing, mixed income housing does not, at least the research shows, does not lower neighboring property values. Now, that's not to say that if you put 200 units in the middle of a neighborhood full of McMansions or $1 million homes, some people might decide they don't want to live there, and the value of those homes might go down. But by and large, the research shows that neighboring property values do not go down when you build well-designed, well-situated, uh, a little bit denser housing. It's been shown all over. I'm going to be showing you pictures in a little while. And it just is not true. And there have been a number of studies that way. School costs, the same way. I'm going to talk about that in another slide. We can talk about that some more later, too, if you want. Again, people worry about crime and neighborhood quality. Uh, we're not talking about Pruitt-Igoe or Cabrini Green here or the projects. We're talking about well-designed mixed income housing. And again, it gets been built all over the state. And like I say, the police are not there every night, and it's not a problem, and has proven not to be a problem in other places. And like I say, I'll get to those photos in a minute. Chris, the next slide, please. Okay, so here's an example about school-age children. Everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people say, well, if we build multifamily housing, we're going to get more school children, and that's going to increase our school budget. Well, first of all, Rutgers did the seminal research on this over a decade ago, but other towns like Fairfield have found anecdotally have borne out the Rutgers study. Essentially, when you build a one-bedroom multifamily unit, you get 0.04 public school age children. And that makes sense because how many parents are going to live in a one-bedroom unit with a child with one bedroom? They're not going to sleep in the same bed. So essentially what Rutgers found was that you get 4 out of 100 one-bedroom units where you're going to get a child, public school age child. Two-bedroom unit looks 0.27. In other words, 1 out of 4 two-bedroom units has a child. Again, it makes sense because most two-bedroom multifamily units are going to be grandma who wants a second bedroom for when the grandkids sleep over, or two singles sharing, or a young couple that wants a second bedroom for guests or an office. 1 out of 4 times you'll get a parent and a child. Three-bedroom unit, you start getting a few more children, 1.38. But by and large, you don't get that many kids. And it's buttressed by the idea that enrollments are going down in most towns around the state through the end of this decade. And then further buttressed by the idea that the research has shown that school budgets are not really sensitive to enrollment. Sure, if you have to add a modular classroom or entire school or a teacher, it's going to cost you a little more. But usually when you get children, you don't get that many. They're spread over a number of schools and grades in the school district, and it doesn't cost that much. Plus, school budgets are sensitive to energy and labor and healthcare costs, not enrollment so much. So again, I know a lot of people believe that because they think if the school budget is $1,000 and we have 10 children, it costs us $100 per child. And so if we add another child, it's going to cost us another 100. That's not the case. I'm sure all of us are sitting in rooms now where we could probably seat 3 or 4 more people, and it wouldn't cost us any more for heat and light. So, I mean, I think you get the idea. It's just not the case. Chris, next slide, please. Similarly, property values, again, this you can look up this research on your own. It just is not the case. There's no measurable impact on housing property values. Chris, next slide, please. Okay, so here are a bunch of photos of really well-designed housing in towns that are well-to-do, but have decided that they need a wider array of housing options for the residents there or the residents they would like to come there. So I'll briefly describe these, and Chris will just advance the slides when I'm done. So New Canaan, their housing authority has been very forward-looking over the years. They built, gosh, there must be 80 of these 1 and 2 bedroom units. Some of them are duplex, some of them are on one floor, but they're really nicely designed, and they've been a great addition to the town. Next. Avon, Jeff Sager from Metro Realty built these on an industrial site. Now, this is really kind of interesting. A lot of towns have found that they can either rezone industrial sites or leave the industrial zoning in place and do an overlay zone. Kathy knows about the Home Connecticut program. It's a state statute. You can do a residential overlay, but leave the existing zoning in place. And the reason why that's important sometimes is that there are always people in town, sometimes on the zoning commission, on the economic development commission, who are thinking that the industrially zoned properties can still attract a factory or some other manufacturing facility. They might. It's great. The point is, if you do the overlay, you can decide if we get a manufacturer coming in and wanting the property first, great. And if not, maybe we'll get a housing developer. This was done on a road with where there is industrial property and manufacturers, but it's beautifully done and has proven to be a lovely development. And this, I took this picture about 15 years after it was built, and you can see, like I say, it looks probably better today than it did when it was built because the landscaping has grown in, but it's been well maintained. I mean, that's key. It's good to have a good property manager to make sure that the property remains looking good. Next one, Chris, please. This is Stonington. This was actually built by NeighborWorks New Horizons and Selah Muscara, who is now the commissioner of the Department of Housing. She's done 80 units there. It's on Route 1. It's a bus route. It's in the, what's the best way to put this? The western side of the Pawcatuck section of Stonington, and it's really lovely and it's well done. And these are 1 and 2 bedroom units, not unites. I'm sorry for the typo. Next one, please. This again was done by Jeff Sager at Metro Realty in Farmington. This is about 30% income restricted units at 60 and 80% their median income. It is very close to the Yukon Health Center. And so nurses, lab techs, and in some cases interns are living there. We skipped through.
Sorry. There you go.
Yeah. And again, this is a photo I took last year, but this is 15 years old too. And they're beautiful and they have little outdoor patios and they're beautiful. Next, please. This is in Brookfield. This is a large development. This is over 200 units. And again, separate entrances and, really, really nicely done, a wide range, 1s and 2s and 3s. And, Brookfield has really thought hard about where they can put this. And, they put this in a spot which is not close to transit, but still much in demand. Next one, please. This is a former nursing home that it was done by Garden Homes, Richard Friedman. The footprint worked. These are smaller units, 1 and 2 bedrooms, but again, this is repurposing of an existing property, and it's on Route 1 in the eastern end of Darien. Next one, please. South Windsor, this is elderly housing. It's if there's such thing as older elderly housing, this is what it is. It's duplexes, and so. But I believe they have bedrooms on the first floor as well for the elderly people who live there, and they're affordable. I think for people making 60 and 80% the median. So another example, separate entrances. Next one, please. This was done again by Garden Homes. This is in Fairfield on the Bridgeport border. This is about 60 units, again, 3 stories, nicely done. I mean, nothing fancy, but well constructed and well managed. This is one place I have to say where I met a woman who was living in a 1 bedroom with her daughter. Ironically, she was a nurse's aide. She slept in the living room. Her daughter slept in the bedroom. And she, because she had lived there in Fairfield, was able to have a job taking care of a couple in their 90s who live in Westport, who, if she could not live in Fairfield and get to their home in Westport so that they could age in place, they would have to go to a nursing home. So there you have the connection. Next one, please. These are really interesting. These are done by Liz Verna of Verna Builders in Wallingford. These are near the Oakdale Theater off the Merritt Parkway. These are freestanding condominiums, 3 bedrooms, really well done. The owners own about 10 feet all around the home so they can plant their gardens. And the property owner for the rest of the association takes care of the bigger lawns and the roads and all the landscaping in the area. And it's about 80 units. About 30 of them are income restricted for people at 60 and 80% of median income. And again, this was built about 20 years ago, and as I say, it looks as good today as it did, better than when it was built. So there you have some examples, and there are more, but we can talk about those later. Chris, next slide, please. I don't want this to go on too long, so I'm going to kind of move through these. I just wanted to point out this RAND organization study is really interesting because it basically talks about Montgomery County, Maryland, and their housing authority created housing there where I think 12 or 13% of the units were income restricted, and the people who moved in were therefore able to go to the Montgomery County schools. And guess what? Their reading and math scores went up. So, it's just a good example of the opportunity that housing provides. The other is Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law. Some of you may have seen it. Now, he's talking about Black people here, but I would go so far as to say this is opportunity for anyone. What he points out is that, and some of you may know this, after World War II, the Federal Housing Administration, thinking they were doing or keeping to their fiduciary responsibility, told builders that they would loan them money or guarantee their loans, but only if they promised not to sell to Black people, because they thought after the war, and we can call this whatever we want to call it, that renting or selling to Black people was a risky move with taxpayers' money. And so what happened was that today, people like my parents who were able to buy that $7,500 cape after my dad came home for the war, and over the next 30 years saw it appreciate to $350,000, $400,000. And that wealth didn't make them rich, but it certainly made my parents able to invest in the stock market, start a business, pay for college educations. It allowed a whole generation to do that. But if you were not allowed to buy a home back in the early 50s and you had to rent all the time, you could not accrue wealth and couldn't do a lot of those things. And so if you're still renting today, it's the reason why Black people earn about 65% of what whites earn, but they have about 10% of their wealth. Chris, next slide, please. So again, there are a lot of questions here and you guys can look at this and talk about it, but I'll just go through a few of them. Um, Towns have to ask themselves: Are residents burdened by their housing costs in our town? Is there a range of supply to allow the people we want and need to move to town? What resources can we offer to build around? Next slide, please. Um, Important questions, and we can talk about this afterwards. What is affordable housing? People think sometimes I'm begging the question, but I say, well, affordable housing is housing you can afford. Some people, if you're earning $100,000 a year, you can afford to pay $2,000 a month for rent. If you're earning $50,000 a year, you can. What's small A affordable housing? That's what some people call naturally occurring affordable housing. People say, well, I could afford that rent. Well, yeah, but not everybody can. And the problem is that if the market gets tight, as it is right now for rental housing, housing that's not income restricted, not restricted by a deed or some other financing agreement, uh, that housing rises in value. And a lot of towns have seen that. I mean, my daughter and her husband now live in Greenpoint in Brooklyn. You couldn't pay anyone to live in that neighborhood 25 years ago, and now there are townhomes that are selling for $2 million and then need about $1 million worth of work. So, unless it's income restricted, small A affordable housing can suddenly become unaffordable if the market pushes it that way. We can talk about the 830G statute. How important is that 10% threshold? Should that be the town's goal? What should we seek to learn from other towns' experiences? Like I said, not every town is alike. As a matter of fact, most towns are very different. So, you pick and choose what other towns have done to see what may apply well to Woodbridge. Next slide, please. Um, Again, these are other questions. How unaffordable is the town's housing, and how are you going to measure that? What are the factors that need to be presented to create income restricted housing? Some times you have a strong market for market rate units. If you don't have a lot of multifamily housing, uh, the market rate units can subsidize the affordable units. In Old Saybrook, which did not have a lot of multifamily housing, a developer came in and built 186 multifamily units right next to the Old Saybrook train station. 30% of them were affordable at 80% of median income, and they're all rented. And he needed not a single dime of subsidy because he was able to get a high enough price for the market rate units that he could take less for the affordable units and still make a nice profit. So again, it really depends on the market in the town. How much supply do you have? How much do you need? What will the demand be? Um, and what help can a town offer to a developer? Some towns provide a density bonus. In other words, if he builds more density, he builds enough affordable units, you'll allow him to build more units to cover his costs. Some towns give tax abatements. My town in West Hartford, for the very first time, just gave a developer a tax abatement on a 320 unit development where the developer is going to make 10% of the units income restricted. Some towns provide subsidies, some towns relax parking requirements, some towns will build the road or assume another cost that the developer might otherwise have to incur. Chris, next slide, please. Um, Again, there are questions to answer. How does affordable housing's location add or subtract from its value? Sometimes, you put it in the right place, it can really be valuable. Where is the affordable housing you have? Are there better or worse places to put it? Does it lower property values, increase crime, increase school costs? I would say no, but some people are not going to buy that. Where are there good examples of mixed housing in Connecticut? I showed you pictures, but I can offer you more examples of it too. And like I say, the idea of being built out, you're not going to knock down a beautiful structure or an important building, but there are some places where just because there's something there now doesn't mean there can't be housing there in the future. Next slide. Uh, Again, these are principles to consider. You have to think about that. Do you want municipal workers to live in town? Do you want others to be able to come live in your town? Those nurses' aides, the people who make the lattes at the Starbucks, etc. So, these are all things to consider. I think that's the last slide, Chris. Um, yeah, that's my contact information. If you want to reach me, I'm happy to talk to anybody who calls anytime. And like I say, I'm happy to come back and help you guys. And now I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Well, thanks, David. That was very, very comprehensive and informative. And you're right. I think it probably did answer a lot of questions tonight. The examples of the different housing choices was really incredible, and we could certainly envision that in our town for some of those examples. But right now we're opening this up for questions, and I imagine there could be a couple out there. It's Beth.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask David if you comment a little bit more on transit and how, if you don't have a lot of it, how does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, there are 43 towns in this state that have commuter rail or up in central Connecticut, the fast track. Um, but there are towns that have bus lines, and if you can put housing that's walkable to the bus, that's good. But otherwise, putting it near a highway is good. At least people can get on and off pretty quickly and get there. But yeah, if you don't have real commuter rail or mass transit, that's just not an option open to you. So it's best to put it then the second and third choices, which are places where people will tolerate the density, where it's not going to mess up their neighborhood. And I know Woodbridge has the area down near the Merritt. Maybe that's the best place. Maybe there's some other places, but I don't. Like I say, I wouldn't begin to tell you where.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Hi, can I ask a question? I don't
Sure.
know how to raise my hand on this. I'm at on the Woodbridge Board of Ed, and I'm just curious. There is some concern that our elementary school is kind of hitting its outer limits in terms of capacity. And I mean, I know what you said, but I'm wondering if you have worked with any districts where schooling capacity has been an issue, and kind of what creative ways they have worked to overcome that being a potential issue.
You know, I haven't. I mean, I worked with Darien a little bit. Darien has always had continued high enrollment because of its proximity to New York, and it's also another lovely town. Um, I think it's important to um, really kind of look at the numbers and figure out, if you build 1 and 2 bedroom units, like I say, you're just not going to get a lot of school kids. Frankly, you get way more school children when you build single family homes in a town. Um, and it's not to say, I mean, I think the median age in Woodbridge is 49. If you have a relatively older town, which Woodbridge is, and you build some multifamily options for all those elderly homeowners to downsize, you will get more families moving to town with school children, and they're going to move into the single family homes. So, um, you know, I think you guys know your town best, and um, you know where it's going to go, and what the projected enrollments are. So, I think the Department of Education has data on enrollment. OPM has data on enrollment, and it's good to probably look at the past history and projections for some of the towns, and talk to the towns that have not seen a large drop in enrollment and are not projecting large drops, and talk to them about what they're doing. But like I say, if you build 1 and 2 bedroom multifamily units, that's not going to be your problem. Your problem is going to be the sale of single family homes to young families.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Thanks.
Sure. Other
Hi,
questions?
David.
Can
Hi,
can you
Sheila.
tell us a little bit more about the difference between that small a affordable and then the deed restricted affordable housing? Because if
Sure.
our recent TPZ zone change allows us to have things like apartments over garages and that sort of thing, but if we don't make them deed restricted, they're not going to count, right, towards affordable, even if
Yeah,
they're very low rent.
yeah. I mean, I think that yeah, and that gets into the issue of whether towns are going to hit that 10% mark, whether that ought to be the goal. Um, I think the real issue is, um, do you want to have homes that will continue to remain affordable for people at different income levels? And, as you know, because we've talked about this, uh, uh, unless there's a deed restriction on the housing, unless the developer has gotten government financing that also requires that a certain percentage of the units remain income restricted, and unless you have somebody in town hall who's making sure that when those units are rented or sold, that they remain rented to or sold to people who meet the income criteria, um, they're not going to remain affordable. And I remember when I first started doing this work, Stratford had a number of units and they said, well, these are affordable units. And then Stratford suddenly became hot, and their rental market became hot, and some of those units just skyrocketed in value. And believe me, they weren't palaces; they were just in the right location near transit. When West Hartford, and I'm sure you've been up here, built Blueback Square, the developers didn't want to make some of those units income restricted at all, and the town didn't require them to. And they said, well, the rents here are only about $1,100 to $1,200 a month for these units, and that was true for about 3 weeks. And then the market pushed those rents much higher. So small A affordable housing, like we say, it's affordable, but it's not affordable to everyone, and it won't remain affordable if there's not enough supply to meet the demand. The demand will bid up the price. So my advice to towns that want to make sure that there's housing for those lab techs and those kindergarten teachers and those occupational therapists. Uh, they need to restrict the income on those apartments and keep them affordable. Usually the deed restrictions run for 30 years. Other questions? Okay. Um, I would invite you, if you don't have additional.
Excuse me, I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
One of the things you mentioned, well, a couple of things. One of the things that you mentioned early on was that affordable housing leads to educational opportunities unless people get on the success ladder.
Mhm.
And then on the other hand, you say you don't get that many children moving into affordable housing units. How do you square those two statements?
Well, the only thing I can say is that if any child that can get into a school district that has uh, more honors and AP classes, smaller class sizes, more experienced teachers, uh, uh, and maybe more to the point, doesn't just offer history and calculus, but also offers literature and theater and art and music. Because not all kids are great at calculus, but they are good at dance and playing the guitar. Um, in other words, any school district that offers a much wider range of of avenues for children to find themselves and find what they're good at and find success. Uh, if you can move there, that's great. I mean, my son was not a sports guy; he was a theater and music and newspaper guy. And if he could not have gone to Hall High School in West Hartford, I don't know whether he would have optimized his abilities if he'd had to go to Hartford Public or New Britain High School. Um, the numbers I quoted are just the numbers. I mean, like I said, in a one-bedroom multifamily unit, you're not going to get a lot of school kids, nor a two-bedroom. But like I said, if you have some of your older residents sell their homes and downsize, and you have 4-bedroom colonials that go for sale, yeah, you're going to get a number of school children moving into those. You just don't get them into small multifamily units. That was my point.
Even if people really move to Woodbridge for the school system, I mean, that's the big attraction to moving to this town.
Right, but they have to have a place they can afford to move to. And if
I know, but I grew up where people had families in one-bedroom apartments. I grew up in Brooklyn,
yeah,
and
me too. Where'd you grow up?
working class people had families in one-bedroom apartments, and the kids slept on sofas in the living room. It was fairly common, and these were, working class people who had a reasonable income, but they couldn't afford a bigger apartment.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm sure you have building inspectors, and you're not going to allow 8 people to live in a one-bedroom apartment. And
No, but in a two-bedroom apartment, it would be doable. There was another thing that you mentioned. I just like to bring up because philosophically, it's bothered me. You mentioned that, what was it? The wage to afford an apartment is $27 an hour.
well,
Now,
that's what you have to earn
uh,
to afford a typical 2-bedroom apartment.
about $1,200 or $1,400 rent. Now, it seems to me, and this is not quite on your subject, but it's something to think about. It seems to me that if people are working a job and they're not making enough money to live in, then the people who are employing them have a bad business model, a non-viable business model. And is anybody addressing that?
Well, uh, I mean,
Because
I think a lot of people are talking about raising the minimum wage and living wage and that sort of thing. I don't think that I mean, we've seen that the fact that post pandemic, we're not really post pandemic, but now in this later stage of pandemic, fewer people are going back to work, and a lot of businesses are looking for labor. And the calculus supposedly is that workers are saying, I can't, I'm not going to do that work for that little money. Um, so are employers figuring out whether they can pay more? Yeah, but I would argue that if not a bigger part of the problem, certainly an equal part of the problem is we just don't have the range of housing options that we need in the state. And
right,
we need
it's a
more
separate
supply.
problem, right? But the taxpayer winds up subsidizing the employer because we have to subsidize the housing so
You
people
don't
can.
have to subsidize the housing. I guarantee you that if Woodbridge found the property to put uh, 200 units of multifamily housing and made whatever it was 10, 15, 20% of them income restricted, and did it in a place where you were not going to invite a lot of opposition to it, those units would rent in no time because you don't have much multifamily housing there, and I'm sure there's demand for it. So, and it wouldn't cost the taxpayers anything. Frankly, the taxpayers would benefit because the market wants that, and the grand list would grow because you built that kind of housing.
Thank you.
Yep.
Uh, in answer to that, this is Dominic Thomas. I'm back on. My zoning thing finally finished. And it was an interesting point to come back on. And I don't know if I'm repeating stuff, but with respect to the issue of taxpayer benefits and economic development, right now, when you go around to a lot of the other towns that do have high density housing, um, especially towns like Woodbridge, those economic development, when you're doing planning, it's composed of two items. Number one, it's a uh, project that generates more in taxes than it takes out in services. That's the simple explanation. The second explanation for economic development is when you're talking about high density residential, you're talking about bringing in people with money in their pocket, is the best way to put it. Whether or not they have a lot of money or a little money, whether or not they're working, they're spending money on the local community, and that generates economic development because then you support the local businesses. And in many of the towns I've done in my presentations, land use presentations, pointed out the numbers that the higher density residential are the ones that generate especially when you're talking 1 and 2 bedroom units, they have almost no kids, very few kids in the school system, so there's no impact there, which is something that people tend to worry about even in our declining enrollment. Um, and but they also bring people in for the businesses, and the businesses love it. So identity residential, as David said, just when I got on, uh, uh, believe me, if you build those kind of apartments in there, you will find 2 groups going into it. You will find the younger people going in who want to stay in. And as in several projects that I've been involved in, older people have downsized into them when they rather go into an apartment rather than into like a 55 and over community.
Any other questions? Okay, well, maybe we'll, Kathy, what do you want to do? Leave it at that?
Well, let's do one more last call for questions. And, I can't see any hands raised. So if anybody has a question, you just need to just shout it out. Okay, I think we're good.
Okay.
And David, thank you so much. This was very, very informative. I do want to remind folks that we do have a public forum that is scheduled, as Dominic said earlier, from December 2nd at 7 p.m. Um, hoping we get the green light for that, or maybe it's yellow lights and for 3 weeks in a row. But whatever, we're hoping that we could, have that in person to have a more interactive public forum on this topic. And I like to just thank all the participants, the Board of Selectmen, Finance, Education, P&Z, for being part of this conversation tonight.
Thank you for inviting us. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.